From the physicality to the explosiveness, the Miami Hurricanes confirmed exactly who they are on Sunday night.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and host of Post Game on the Miami Hurricanes radio network. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. On this Locked On Canes, we'll talk about the goals heading into the Bethune Cookman game this Saturday. I would imagine and I would hope Miami's going to be able to play a number of different players this weekend. We're going to talk about what we need to see. I'd like to share and examine Carson Beck's insight on that win over Notre Dame. Beck just spoke to the media earlier today on Wednesday, but here's where I want to start on this episode. So now that we're 3 days removed from Miami's gigantic, biggest win of Mario Cristobal's tenure so far at Miami, the gigantic 27-24 win against Notre Dame. We've had a few days to reflect on it. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been asked about this a lot because I've gone on a lot of people's YouTube channels and radio shows and podcasts over the last couple days, and I've been asked what we learned about the Hurricanes from that opening game. And the more that I think about it, the more I realize I didn't learn much of anything new about Miami, but that's okay because Miami, what they did on Sunday was they confirmed and they validated exactly who I thought they were. Observing this team in fall practice, especially when Carson Beck was healthy, but even going back to spring football, when you could see what was happening at the line of scrimmage, you could see what was happening with all the new defensive backs, and you could see what was happening with a guy like Malachi Toney. I mean, anybody who's really been following this team for the past several months was not completely shocked to see Malachi do what he did. Now, maybe you're a little bit surprised that in his first collegiate game against a top 10 opponent that he stepped up that much, but you shouldn't be surprised, folks, because we knew Malachi Toney was and is going to be a playmaker. So really, in terms of what I learned about this team, I guess where I'm at is after seeing in practices the levels of competition constantly going up, just seeing and understanding how much bigger, how much more physical this team has gotten now as we're into year 4 of the Mario Cristobal era, and just seeing how much better the defense has looked and how much better they've competed in practice. I was in a place where heading into Sunday, I just needed to see it to believe it, right? The other part of that being, again, Carson Beck, since I'm sure going back to the offseason workouts that were not open, I wasn't able to watch any of those, but going back to the start of fall camp, I mean, the arm, which looked fine to great on Sunday and looked great throughout training camp, fully recovered from the injury, but showing the sort of leadership and off the field stuff that the folks in Georgia didn't want you to believe was in his arsenal, but guess what it is? And showing that veteran presence and having the great decision making in that game. Like, I felt really bullish and optimistic about Carson. He went out there and confirmed it. Miami, it turns out, was absolutely right in investing in a player like Beck and his experience. Because again, I know a lot of people in the offseason were like, is he worth the money? Miami, supposedly they're spending like $60 million on Carson Beck. And in reality, it's somewhere between like $3 to $3.2 million, we found out. But still, it's a hefty investment in NIL for an experienced quarterback. Whereas, Duke spent allegedly over $4 million on a guy with G5 experience in Darian Mensah versus a guy with SEC experience like Carson Beck. We'll see how that plays out for Duke, but I think it's fair to say Miami was wise to make that investment, because if you don't have an experienced quarterback, you probably don't win that football game with how good Notre Dame was in so many different areas. So Miami showed us, I think here's a big thing that, again, For those who haven't been paying attention, but maybe, hadn't thought about Miami in a few months and then watched what they did to Notre Dame on Sunday, you probably learned, unlike last year, this looks like a balanced football team, complementary football, right? The offense, which was overall very good against Notre Dame, was certainly not perfect in the fourth quarter when they needed stops, especially that big stop as time was expiring at the end of the game when you had Reuben Bain and Akeem Mesidor who became unblockable on that final Notre Dame possession. Miami could count on their defense in a way they couldn't do last year. Obviously there was a one really, really bad miscue on special teams. Outside of that, special teams was solid, including, you talk about a guy making the most of his moment. Carter Davis, I believe, before arriving at Miami, was 4 for 11 in his career. He goes 2 for 2 in two of the most important kicks Miami may have all season long, including the 47-yard game winner. That was absolutely clutch. So we learned, or at least had it confirmed to us, that Miami is a balanced football team. Made some big throws and big catches. Thank you, CJ Daniels, especially, and thank you, Malachi Toney. Thank you, Carson Beck, for the big boy throws. Big runs when you needed them most. Always, we saw a handful of those last year with Damian Martinez and the likes. We saw one of those the other night when Shamar Brown scores that touchdown and the entire offensive line is pushing him into the end zone. That's the sort of physicality that defines a Mario Cristobal, Alex Mirabal offensive line. So we know Miami is a physical team. We know now, unlike last year, Miami is a balanced team. They just validated everything we saw in training camp. Now, I also don't want to get too far ahead of myself because, for as big of a win as that was, and, we talked about this on a YouTube short yesterday, not on our main episode, Miami moves up 5 spots in the AP poll. They move from number 10 to number 5. So you get all the expectations and the renewed pressure that comes with being a top 5 team. So the challenge for these guys is going to be being consistent week in and week out and finishing a season. 9-0 last year, you finished the season 10-3. This team knows you still have 11, well, hopefully 12, 13, 14, up to 15 if you get through that college football playoff games still in front of you. You have to be as consistent and perform the way you did on Sunday all season long. In fact, I like some of the things that Carson Beck said today. He was asked a question by a media member on how you avoid becoming complacent. Carson Beck's answer: this team is very internally driven. He said, very hungry. There are a lot of people with a lot of things to prove on this team. And then he added, humility is always a week away. That's what you have to remember, right? You're on top of the world after beating Notre Dame. I'm sure Miami is going to win this weekend against Bethune Cookman, but then you've got a USF team that looked really physical and solid in an upset win over Boise State to start the year. And then you've got a hungry, looks good Florida team the following week. Then after a bye week, you play Florida State, who humbled Alabama a few days ago. So you have plenty of opportunities for letdowns coming up on this schedule. But I believe this team has the balance, the physicality, the mental and physical strength, and hopefully they avoid that complacency that Carson Beck talked about, that this team can finish what they've just started this past Sunday. So again, you guys tell me if you learned anything new about Miami against Notre Dame. I think if nothing else, every hope that I had, every expectation that I had about the physicality, being able to control the line of scrimmage, about Carson Beck not being a turnover machine, despite what some people were saying after his 12 interceptions last year, the way he took care of the football and managed that game, about Miami's defensive secondary stepping up and looking transformed from last year, about playing with balance. I didn't learn anything new, but everything I expected and everything I hoped was confirmed. We'll talk more about what Carson Beck had to say after the game. I also, I've done a little bit of this with Notre Dame fans, but I'm not big on saving receipts and throwing stuff in people's faces, but there is one that I want to get to later on in the show about, and this is not directly related to Miami, but it kind of is based on something someone from Bill Belichick's staff said before the season. If you watched what happened in North Carolina on Monday night, there's certain pieces of rhetoric and certain slogans in Chapel Hill that I never want to hear them say again. And part of that was a preseason call out against Mario Cristobal that looks pretty dumb now in hindsight. You want to keep it locked right here, my friends. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Mazda crafts cars for those who choose to do more than simply move. They follow what moves them every time they drive. And that's what makes Mazda stand out. They go beyond safety, style, and performance to deliver a driving experience that feels alive in every detail. Guys, Mazda offers more than safety. It's won more 2025 IIHS Top Safety Pick Awards than anyone else. As an athlete who focuses on every detail, you want Mazda to do the same, and they do. From metallic accents to hand-stitched Napa leather. Whether it's a quick drive to practice or a weekend road trip, Mazda makes even everyday drives feel special. It's the small details that make the plays. And just like there's more to every player, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda. Move and be moved. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen. For your next listen, make sure you check out Locked On ACC. Kenton Gibbs and I host that show. We go around the Atlantic Coast Conference, all the big football results. You got Miami and Florida State now top of almost all the ACC power rankings. Clemson maybe lost a little bit of their stock with that loss to LSU at home over the weekend. Make sure you check out Locked On ACC, free wherever you get your podcasts and free on YouTube. By the way, here's a note on this weekend's game. And again, like we know, Bethune Cookman, they play a different level of football from Miami. So, you get it. Like a lot of years you go to the Bethune Cookman or FAMU games and the crowds are not great. A lot of people, in South Florida find other things to do. This game, I'm told, is almost completely sold out. Like, I think there's maybe 1,000 or less tickets remaining, which tells you it's probably gonna be a sellout, at least officially a sellout by Saturday. And that warms my heart because you heard so much of what Mario Cristobal had to say after the Notre Dame win, which was a record crowd at Hard Rock Stadium. It was 67,000 plus. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it was a tremendous crowd. Like Cristobal said, I want you guys here every week. Like my challenge, he said to the fans, is to show up every single home game the way you just showed up for this one. And gosh, if we can get, a similar type of crowd for Bethune Cookman, and you still have 6 home games after that one, including Florida at home a couple weeks after, it's a good sign for the way this city, this community, this alumni base, and a lot of the alumni don't even live in South Florida. They live all over the country, but they come down for games to see this team. If they can keep doing what they just did on the field, embraced like this by the Miami community, it really warms my heart because you guys know how much I love this team and how much I love this program. And I want us to have a sold out stadium and a raucous crowd every single game, whether it's Bethune Cookman or Notre Dame. I want that place to be absolutely rocking. Here's some more quotes from earlier today from Carson Beck, who, by the way, man, I know he had a tough time, prior to making his Miami debut, the offseason surgery, the grand theft auto, the breakup and everything, for him to be out there winning games and playing the game he loves again. I know he appreciates that. And he just seems like a genuinely happy guy right now. He said about the Notre Dame game, and this backs up what I was just talking about. First thing that stood out to me, Carson said, is how physical of a game it was. It was a physical war. And he said it's always fun to start the year off like that. That's a tone setter for the rest of the season. Like Miami, just faced, again, like there's other good opponents on the schedule. On paper, the best opponent you're going to see all year. And to win that physicality matchup, that sets the tone for the entire season. Beck added, he said, we made plays when we needed to. The whole offense across the board looked really good, he said. There are always little mistakes that happen in the first game that are completely normal. Little miscues, timing or accuracy, little communication things that get ironed out as the season gets going, he said. there weren't any glaring issues with the offense, Beck said. So sounded like he was pretty happy overall about the way things were executed. He talked about his bond with CJ Daniels, because that was, that was a tough throw. Beck was under pressure. Daniels made not only a ridiculously good catch, but an important catch, because if he hadn't caught that, Aiden Schuler, the Notre Dame safety, was standing by, trying to get an interception. But this is something like, and hearing Beck break down this play, I thought was really illuminating for me, because, sometimes fans are just like, well, really wasn't a good throw. Could have easily been intercepted. CJ Daniels bailed him out. The thing is, that play and that situation is something that these guys have worked on. That exact scenario, they have worked on dozens, if not hundreds of times in practice, preparing for that coverage. So here's what Beck said about it. Trust is everything, he said about his bond with Daniels. That's a game-deciding play, he says. And he noted, we dominated the middle 8 of this game, which I'm glad he said it, because I remember for the episode we did on Monday, like my game review, I had written in my notes middle 8, and I didn't get to it. I skipped over it because, sometimes I'm not always on the same page with my own notes, okay? That is a great point Beck brought up, and it's ironic because Notre Dame, I can specifically remember when they were making their run into the CFP and through the CFP, Notre Dame would always control that middle 8. What that refers to is final 4 minutes of the second quarter, final 4 minutes of the second quarter into the first 4 minutes of the third quarter. And that also, as a side note, is why when teams win the coin toss, why they almost always defer, because they want the opportunity to win the middle 8, right? They want to refer to get the ball in the second half, because your hope is we get the final possession of the first half and score. Then we get the ball right back in the third quarter. We try to score again. That's exactly what Miami did. The CJ Daniels touchdown grab was right near the end of the first half. So Miami scores right before halftime, and then they score on their opening drive of the third quarter. They won the middle 8. And sometimes the middle 8, which you could say was the case on Sunday, can decide the entire football game, he said. So he said, we controlled the middle 8 of this game. We dominated, he said. He said, when you can build that rapport and trust with guys referring to CJ, it allows you to do things you normally wouldn't with someone you don't trust, he said. And he noted they prepared for that situation and that coverage. He says, we've done it so many times that at that point, it's second nature, he said. And more on his chemistry with CJ Daniels, he said, we have built that trust with one another since January when we first arrived on campus. So it's like, again, I know it's easy to say, maybe an ill-advised throw, great catch, but that Beck threw that up there to CJ for a reason. He trusted him to make that catch, and they've worked on that scenario a lot. All right, so we got some questions from the Locked On Canes insiders. And hey, if you want to become a Locked On Canes insider, get text messages directly from my phone to yours with one-on-one questions and answers, breaking news, recruiting scoops. You can click the link in the show description below. Become a Locked On Canes insider. Try it free for 14 days. And then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. We add a lot of added value on there in the insiders chat. Low Country Kane wants to know, hey, give me your top 5 players who didn't stand out in week 1, but that you expect to still play a major role this year, and why. So first one for me, Elijah Lofton, who he did definitely make an impact as a blocker, and he had 1 reception for 15 yards. But I think Lofton at certain points this year is going to catch fire, and he's going to be a bigger statistical part of the passing game. I don't think that first game indicates the type of impact he's going to have on this offense, especially as a receiver. He's always going to be doing the little things and blocking, but I think he's going to get more catches. Another one for me, who I think is going to have a big impact this year, didn't necessarily have it on Sunday, is JoJo Trader at receiver. He only played 9 snaps. I think he was on a pitch count because he had an injury during training camp that he recovered from before the first game. But I think he's going to play a lot more than 9 snaps per game. And, there were a couple times that Carson Beck looked for him in the passing game where he was either covered really well or maybe interfered with that the referees didn't call. So the best is yet to come for JoJo, who only played 9 snaps in the game. Another obvious choice who's going to have a bigger impact moving forward is Jordan Lyle. So Jordan Lyle missed a big chunk of the Notre Dame game with a minor injury. He had his ankle taped up. The good news is he's good to go now, and he's back practicing this week. But Lyle didn't play very much, and it ended up working out because guess what? Marty Brown is a stud. Mark Fletcher is also a stud. But, Lyle is going to play a bigger part moving forward. And then Hayden Lowe is a big one for me. I think once we get more rotation at defensive end, he's practiced so well. The true freshman edge rusher who's 255 pounds at 18 years old and, good technique for someone his age. I think he's going to make a bigger impact. And then I struggled to find a fifth one because I don't want to say that this guy didn't have an impact, but I think the impact is going to get bigger for Armando Blunt on the defensive line. I got to double check how many snaps he played. He played a good amount in this game, but I've seen so much and heard so much good about what Blunt did throughout fall camp. I think there's a lot more to come from him. So those are the 5 that I'll give you, and I appreciate the question. All right, we get this question from Hurricane Keys, who says, hey, I want to know what is the one thing that you're looking for coming out of the Bethune game? He says, I know coming out healthy is the biggest thing, but just curious what else you will be looking for. It's from Hurricane Keys. And yeah, I mean, listen, you took the most obvious one, getting out of that game injury free. I would say a couple things I want to see, just mainly, more than likely, this is me talking, the Miami's coaches and players never talk this way because they respect every opponent. And I'm not saying I don't respect the opponent, but being real here, you're going to get some second and third stringers on the field. So I want to see Miami's depth really take advantage of the opportunity, right? I mean, I would imagine we're going to see guys like Chris Wheatley-Humphrey and Gerard Pringle get opportunities at running back in this game. You're going to get some depth showing up on the offensive line. We'll see maybe a lot of Juan Minaya, Tommy Kinsler, S.J. Alofa-Tuli, players like that. I'm sure a lot of Samson Okunlola. And Samson Okunlola actually played a good amount in the opening game. He has cemented himself as a big part of that rotation now. A lot of depth pieces. You guys know I'm a big fan of freshman linebacker Kellen Wiley. We'll see. I would imagine he's going to get some burn in this game. So I want to see the second and third stringers. I want to see them go out and make the most of their opportunities. Same thing with the quarterbacks. I mean, Emory Williams, I know he has had a lot of time for reflection and improvement based on what we saw in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. I would imagine he's going to play a lot this Saturday. So I want to see him go out there and be surgical, methodical, and accurate. And maybe we'll even see a third quarterback, possibly Luke Nickel or Judd Anderson in this game. So that's the big thing. I want to see Miami's depth go out there and show what they can do. And I'll circle back to what I said earlier. I want to hear the crowd. I want to feel the crowd out there. Yeah, I want people to show up for Bethune Cookman the way that they will for Florida in a couple of weeks. All right, so here's a receipt that I saved that I think is worth revisiting. It's not with Bill Belichick, but it's with his general manager, Michael Lombardi, who's running his mouth before the season. 48-14, you might want to walk some of these comments back. You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on Locked On Canes. Folks, we're only getting started with FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here. FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It's quick, easy, and it's the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. We're also proudly brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all of their financial accounts or what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all of your accounts in a minute, see their clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Guys, Monarch has helped me so much just organizing my finances, my family's finances, and realizing how much I was overspending on things like food delivery and streaming services. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONCollege. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. All right, so this is this is not even anything related to Miami versus Notre Dame, but I can remember a comment that was made during the offseason, a series of comments that just annoyed me. You have the whole dog and pony show in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and as my buddy Kenton Gibbs, who played at NC State, who co-hosts Locked On ACC with me, will always remind me, the way North Carolina runs their athletic department, especially the football side of it, it's a lot of flash and not a whole lot of substance, right? It's like they tend to go for the marketing wins over the actual on the field wins. And so the whole circus with Bill Belichick, but listen, Bill usually keeps things pretty respectful, I guess, in the media. But the guy who's really been annoying me throughout the offseason is his program's general manager, Mike Lombardi, who does have, big time NFL GM experience. But the way this guy has just been so dismissive of people who do this at the college level, just really acting like, oh, we got all these guys who worked in the NFL. We're just going to come in here and we're going to dominate the college game. So they've had this slogan in Chapel Hill that hopefully for their own pride, they never say this ever again. But Lombardi was saying repeatedly during the offseason, we're the 33rd NFL team. That's what he was saying. The 33rd NFL team on Monday night against, a good but not world beater TCU team. North Carolina, they thought they reinvented the transfer portal by bringing in 70 new players. Well, those 70 new players looked like they just met each other for the first time on Monday night. Couldn't tackle, couldn't block, couldn't protect the football. Outside of their first scripted drive, had no idea what they were doing out there. And so I go back to that 33rd NFL team, but here's what really bothers me about Lombardi. So before the season started, it was shortly after he took the job there, he was asked to define his role as the general manager. And in his answer, he took a completely unprovoked, out of left field shot at Mario Cristobal. Like, was not asked about Cristobal, just completely volunteered a shot at Miami's head coach. So he says about his job, the job will entail player evaluations, developing a grading system, building a team around what you want to become. That's so important, In college, you have all these first-round picks. Well, you still got to build a team, he said. I mean, Mario Cristobal has been wonderful in recruiting, but they haven't been able to get to the final 12. You got to build a full team. It's not about winning the recruiting battle. It's about making the team the best it can be. So for me, that's the job. So like out of nowhere, he's saying, hey, look at that guy in Miami can recruit the players, but can't do anything with them. Well, maybe focus on what you're doing there. All right, we get this question from OG, who says, hey, any insight into the conservative play calling for Miami in the fourth quarter? I assume a lot of it was trust in the defense. So let me play devil's advocate here. And obviously, like all of you, I was sweating in the fourth quarter, and I was just wishing, when we're running it 3 straight times, I'm like, oh man, I'd love a big passing play. I'd love to move the chains. I'd love to go for a touchdown here. But to be fair, I do believe that was a little bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because I think about last year when Miami, blew a 21-point lead against Syracuse. how Miami kept leaving too much time on the clock by being pass heavy. And that, of course, people complained about that management. And now that Miami is operating in a way to theoretically bleed the clock when you have a lead, people are complaining about that. You hit the nail on the head. Part of it is trusting your defense. And that trust turned out to be justified because Miami's defense stepped up and dominated that final Notre Dame possession. And by the way, I gave a lot of praise to Ruben Bain yesterday, rightfully so. But don't think I've forgotten about Akeem Mesidor. Akeem had an awesome game. He had Miami's third highest Pro Football Focus defensive grade at 77.5. He had 5 tackles. He had a sack and a half, a TFL and a half in the game. And he and Bain together were rocking and rolling on that final Notre Dame possession. So don't think I've forgotten about him as well. But, you know, when you're in this situation, and I know Notre Dame was stacking the box and everything, but you think about what can happen if you're not running the football up the middle. Incomplete passes stop the clock, keep Notre Dame from needing to use their timeouts. An interception, of course, would be catastrophic, and outside runs have a bigger risk for lost yardage. So, but again, like, I'm playing devil's advocate. Like, I'm not saying it was perfect, but at a certain point, it's not only about coaching and play calls, it's also about the players executing. Like, that's probably more than half of it, right? It's like 40% calling the right plays, 60% the players executing it. And yeah, even if your offense, was not able to pick up all the first downs you would have liked, your defense did step up when they were needed most. And then also Miami's final possession, your kicker stepped up and drilled a 48-yarder, which is part of his job. Would I have liked to have picked up like an extra 10 yards and gotten him up for a 38-yard kick? Absolutely. But there's always two sides to the coin. And if Miami had some incomplete passes and kept more time and more timeouts for Notre Dame, because imagine if when Notre Dame had their final drive, a big part of how Miami was able to close that out was they get the ball with 1:04 left with no timeouts. If they had a timeout remaining, which they wouldn't have had to use if Miami had an incomplete pass instead of a running play, the situation could have been different. That's all I'm saying. All right, my friends, thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen. Smash that like button, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods, and we'll talk to you again next time on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.